Keng doesn't really need any kind of introduction, I guess. Everyone here knows Keng as being the go-to person for data.
Keng the King, I call him.
Keng the King. Keng the King.
King the King.
Keng does amazing work with data. He's been training a number of newsrooms out here in this region. He knows, a whole bunch of people, and he's, made sure that teams are well equipped when it comes to data on the editorial side of things. Keng used to work at Malaysiakini, so a journalist turned data visionary. Totally possible, it seems. Not everyone's bad at math, it seems, in the journalism community. Keng, very, very proud to have you here. Over to you, man.
All right, thanks for having me, Alan and Richard, and everyone at Splice Beta. So I'm going to share my screen now. I have a very short slides. All right. So you should be looking at my slides now. So these slides, I have shared on my program page. So feel free to download the slide if you need to, get all the notes here. So today, the title is like, how do you build a data-focused team in your newsroom, right? But I guess this is not something that I can talk about in just 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So I'm going to focus on some fundamentals that I have learned in all these years, in the past 5 years that I have been working with different newsrooms and journalists. So before that, I'm actually my own company is actually called DataN, which means big data and small newsrooms. The N stands for small newsrooms. But most of you would realize that BBC World Service is not a small newsroom. But still, we are working with the remote teams, different teams of BBC in different parts of the world. Still, they are operating with very limited resources. So we are trying to help them to create great data journalism, especially journalists, solo journalists, or newsrooms that are small and medium, right? Not just training, we also do collaboration. So I still call myself a data journalist because I'm still working on projects, reporting projects. Advocacy as well, we have been working with open data groups, to push for more transparency in terms of, opening up government data and things like that, right? So in the past 5 years of my experience working with newsrooms and journalists, the more I realized that people still have this perception about data journalism is that, oh, I use data in my reporting, hence I'm doing data journalism. Or data journalism is about presenting my data, right? That, I think, is more to be considered as data reporting. For me, data journalism, it's something much more than that. And it is not just the use of data. But for me, it's more about the mindset and approach, that you use when you are trying to report an issue, right? So here, I'm always very happy to quote Eva. Eva is here as well. I think her definition of data journalism is, exactly what I agree very much and have been telling the newsrooms and journalists, who I work with, that data journalism is harnessing data to measure a problem and use the data or quantitative information to identify who has been impacted, what is causing the problem, and what the solution might be, right? So it's not just about, reporting the data or just converting the data into some fancy visualizations, right? It's basically to use data for in-depth reporting on certain issue. So I also agree that, very little journalism, right, is based on this type of approach, which is, scientific, and not just scientific, but research-based methodology, right? Very much depends on evidence, right? And it's not just to report the existence of a problem or something on the surface, but it's to use data as an approach to uncover the root of the problem, right? So I think for me, data journalism is not just about the technical skills and know-how and the tools. Of course, those you can learn in all sort of websites, from all sort of books. There are tutorials out there, right? I also run a lot of webinars and tutorials on that. But for me, the most important is actually the mindset and the approach. You are trying to report on a problem, and you're trying to inform your audience about that problem. So in this case, I always advise people who want to do data journalism that you're not just using data to report, but you use data to measure problems, right? There are 4 different categories that you can use data to measure, right? The first is the problem, right? You want to use data to measure how big is the problem. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse, right? The impacts. This depends on what problem you're trying to report, right? There are different angles to impacts, right? Including, who is affected by the problem and how they are affected. Are there some groups that are more affected than others, right? You're trying to identify, the impacts caused by this problem using data again. Using data, you're also able to identify the causes, right? Not just identify, sometimes you are able to measure the causes. What are the causes of the problem? Whose fault? Who should be responsible or accountable for the problems? And what factors have made it, worse or better? Then the last one, using quantitative information or data, we can measure the solutions, right? What are the possible solutions? And if the solution have been implemented, how effective are the solutions? So where before you want to do a data-driven project, right, or a data journalism project, you don't start with data, right? I think that is a mistakes done by a lot of newsrooms that want to do data journalism. They focus on the data. But for me, it's the problem that you want to measure or you want to investigate using the data. So I always advise that you start with a hypothesis or a questions first, right? So how do you do that, right? I'm going to use one example. First, you form your hypothesis, your questions, before you go and look for data and start to analyze your data, right? If you start with data, it's like you're going for a fishing trip, right? You know where are the lakes or the rivers, right? But you're not sure what you're trying to find, right? So you're trying to do some fishing there and trying to see whether you can catch any fish, right? But if you start from a hypothesis questions, it means that you know exactly what you want to investigate or what you want to measure. And from there, you then go and find the data that can help you to answer the questions or to prove or disprove your hypothesis, okay? So the hypothesis, when you're forming it, right, it should be something that can be measured by data, right? Or can be answered, or proven or disproven, right, by data. So go back to the 4 approaches that I shared just now, right? You can start forming your hypothesis by, asking the 4 questions here, okay? And try to be specific as possible on what you want to prove or what you want to measure or what you want to answer in this case, right? So there's one very good data stories that I like all of you. The hypothesis, right, before we look at the story, the hypothesis here is that, most cyclists in Berlin encounter excessive overtaking by motor vehicles. Excessive overtaking here means that, when the vehicles are overtaking the cyclists, it is too close to the cyclist, right? There's a traffic law in Berlin that, prohibits any overtaking that has a distance of less than 1.5 meter. So when you're overtaking, if you get too close to the cyclist, you could be fined by the traffic police, right? This is the law in Berlin, right? The hypothesis is here because, many cyclists in Berlin actually complain about this problem. But according to the local police, the police said that, no, we don't think it is a problem because we don't issue that many tickets, right, to this kind of offenses. So which means that, this is not a serious issue, right? If it's a serious issue, then we could, we should have, issued many more tickets, to the offenders, right? So what happened is that one media organization decided that, they are going to collect data to prove or disprove this hypothesis, whether it is true or not that this is a problem in Berlin, right? And that media organizations are Tagesspiegel. Okay, and the project is called Red Matter. This is a project, award-winning data-driven project. It won one of the awards in the Data Journalism Awards 2019. All right. So from this hypothesis, right, they develop some other questions, about the hypothesis, which is very specific questions. The first one is that they are looking at impacts, right? If this hypothesis is true, then which groups of cyclists are exposed to more excessive overtakings? Is it cyclist groups, that are, older cyclists, or is it younger cyclists, or cyclists, parents, who are carrying children, at the back of their cycle, of their bicycle, things like that, right? Which groups of cyclists they are trying to identify, and which roads in the city have higher number of such excessive overtakings. This is important because if you are able to measure this impact, then you are able to propose solution, right? So those are the areas, or those are the roads that need more attention. Okay. And they also ask, is there a difference between roads with dedicated bike path and those with shared use path, which means that the motor vehicles and the bicycles are sharing the roads, right? So this is you trying to measure the causes of the problem, right? Where if you are able to verify that, that if you have a dedicated bike path, you will see a much less numbers of excessive overtakings, then maybe that is the causes, right? The causes is because there's no bike path, right? Then the next one, are they more excessive overtaking during rush hours? This is also trying to measure the causes, right? Is it because there are many, there are much more motor vehicles on the roads? That's why you have this excessive overtaking, right? I mean, we can have our own, perception or hypothesis about it, but until you really go out and measure it, collect the data to measure what are the numbers, you don't really know the answers, right? The last one is about measuring the solution, right? So how many tickets issued by the police for such offense, and where and when were they issued, right? If you're able to identify, the areas that police are enforcing this law, then you might be able to measure, whether this is a effective solution or not, right? If not, then what are the other solutions, right? These are some of the questions that you can develop, right, from the hypothesis, right? So next, let's go to the project and check out the results. Okay, I'm going to switch to the tab. Right, so this is the story. Okay, you will get the link from the slides, if you click on the slide link on the program page. Everything is in German. I don't read German, but luckily we have translation. So this translation is not 100% accurate, right? But we just need to know that the gist of it. Okay, so there are different parts about this whole investigative project, but where I'm most interested that the results, right? So what happened is that Tagesspiegel, they assemble 100 devices, and they gave the devices to 100 volunteer cyclists, right? So what happened is that the volunteers will install the device on their bicycle, and then they will just cycle like usual. Whenever there's an overtaking, the device would detect the distance between the bicycle and the motor vehicle, and then take a photograph of the motor vehicle, right? It's just to make the photograph is to verify like what kind of cars, is it a bus, is it a normal passenger car, or maybe sometimes it's because the bicycle is overtaking other types of objects, right? Is to verify whether that is a motor vehicle or not, right? So then this device will send all the data to the mobile phone, and this is how the newsrooms collect all the data about overtaking in the city of Berlin. So they recruited 100 volunteer cyclists, install that device on their bicycle and cycle around the cities for 2 months. And they collect the data and they do their analysis, right? So because there's no such data available out there, so they'll have to use their own ways, and crowdsource the data from volunteer cyclists. So if you look at the result, right, these are all the areas or the routes in Berlin covered by the volunteer cyclists, okay? They travel 13,000 kilometers, and they recorded over 16,000 overtakings, right? Out of the 16,000, sorry, 1,600s, correct, 16,000, right? 9,000 out of the 16,000 was considered as excessive overtaking, which means that it is less than 1.5 meter, the distance between the bicycle and the motor vehicle, right? So which means more than half, right, of all those overtakings are actually illegal, okay? And these are all the locations where those overtakings happen, right? Out of those 3,000 times, there are 3,000 times, where the distance is actually less than 1 meter. And there are about 200 is less than 50 meters, right? Imagine that, that's like super close, right? Right, so not just looking at the total numbers, they also look at, this is the total numbers, how many percent. They also look at in which districts, right, those overtaking happen. And you see that there's not much of difference, right? It happens in all different districts. Okay, so what about rush hours, And you can see that from the morning until late afternoon, right? There is not much of a difference, right? It happens, during the daytime, throughout the daytime, right? So, which means that there's the rush hours, is not really a factor in this case. Right, I'm going to show you how they measure which groups are more affected. Okay, this is the explanation about how the sensor measure the distance between the bicycle and the motor vehicle, right? And it measured this distance. So they then look at the data recorded by different cyclists, right? If you wear a reflective vest, there's no difference. The car still don't see you. If you wear a helmet, no difference. If you are older cyclists, no difference. The cars won't stay further away from you. Sorry. Man or woman doesn't make any difference as well. Okay. If you have kids at the back of your bicycle, right? Yes, the cars will be slightly further from you, but only 8.4 cm. Not much, right? Right. So if all those takings were issued tickets, the police, could have issued a total of, 282,000 euro fine, right? So this is a very good case of, starting with a hypothesis and some questions, and you go and collect data to measure these problems, right? But they don't just stop here. They continue to use data to measure about the solution. But of course, there are no solutions in Berlin yet, so they look at Copenhagen, okay? And they use the same thing. They use the same methods. They send cyclists, right, to cycle in Copenhagen, right? And they recorded, what is happening there, right? Okay, this is that to shows that there are more cyclists than motor vehicles in Copenhagen. The test is here, right? They cycle about more than 100 km, okay? And they recorded down all the overtakings, okay? And I'll just skip this. It's definitely lower. The excessive overtakings, the numbers of excessive overtakings in Copenhagen is much lower than in Berlin, right? And they look at why is it different, right? So one of the factors is actually bike path, right? Bike path is making a difference. So this is infrastructure. And there are also different designs at the intersections, right? Compared to Berlin. They have dedicated traffic light, separate traffic lights for cyclists. All right, so you should explore the whole series. I don't have time to cover all of it. They also covered things like where are the danger areas in Berlin. Where the roads, what are the roads that have a higher number of this kind of excessive overtakings, right? So I'm going to go back to my presentation. So that is a example that I would like to share with you. By not starting with data, right? They don't have any data at the first place. They started with a question, with a hypothesis that they don't want to investigate, they don't want to measure, and then they continue to find out, whether there's any data. When they realize that there's no data, then they design something to collect their own data, and they do analysis, right? And from that, they're able to come out with, to measure the impacts, the solutions, as well as the causes, of this problem. So using this data journalism mindset, right, I am thinking that, this can be used for newsrooms problems as well, all right? So again, we don't start with, getting a tool to collect all the data about our analytics, about the page views, about time span, right? But probably we should start with forming a hypothesis question first. And the hypothesis are questions that can be measured, again, answered by quantitative information. And it should lead to an action or solution, right? Whether it's a business strategy or whether there's an editorial decision, right? And then when we have the hypothesis and the questions, then only we go and find and collect the data. Then we only talk about, okay, what are the tools that we need? Whether it's Google Analytics, whether there is, Chartbeat, other tools that can collect the data that we need, right? Then only you can do the data analyzing. And another important part that we should learn from the data journalism approach is that communication or the presentation of your findings to your newsroom, to your colleagues, is extremely important. So for data journalism projects, right, once we have find the findings or insights about the hypothesis that we have, we measure the problems, then it is about how do we present it to our audience. So the same goes for a newsroom, right? If you have found findings or insights about your analytics, using the hypothesis and the hypothesis approach, then you should communicate and present your findings to your newsrooms in the most engaging way that you can find, right? So you want to use visualization, animated visuals, things like that, right? Most importantly, you're not just showing numbers to but you have to tell them a story, right? And to tell a story by, starting with, we have this hypothesis, we have this assumption. So we went out to test it using data, right? And by getting the data and doing some analysis, we found this. And because of that, we think that we should take this action, or we should, choose this solution for this problem, right? So you have to tell a story. It's not just showing numbers, because I see a lot of newsrooms, they are showing all these numbers on their, on their screens in the newsrooms, but after some time, right, you get numb about all these numbers, and those numbers don't make any sense to you at all, right? Because they are not actionable, right? So you have to, tell a story about the numbers and how, what actions or solution can be derived from there. So the examples of some hypotheses or questions that you're able to develop for your newsroom, these are just some of the examples. I believe most of the newsroom managers out there, you guys have many other questions that you want to answer. So just list down some of them. For example, the first one. This is a very specific hypothesis. So in the past 2 years, right, that we published some investigation reports, and these investigation reports converted more new users into subscribers compared to our daily news. And if this is true, then maybe we should allocate more resources to produce more such reports, right? So how do you prove or disprove this hypothesis, right? Once you have this hypothesis, then you go and look at the data. If you don't have the data, then you have to start collecting the data, right? The second one, more than half of the daily news that we publish brought in less than 10% of total page views, right? This happened to some of the newsrooms that I have worked with. They keep telling me that, we don't have enough manpower to pursue, different types of stories because we need to publish this amount of daily news every day, right? And so this is the question I asked them, right? So do you know how much of, of course their KPI is page view, right? So that's why we use page view as a reference point. So I asked them, like, so how many of your daily news, right, that brought in your page views, right? And I asked them, is it more than half of the news that you publish every day? Short one, right? Are they bringing in, a high number of page views? If not, right, if this is true that they bring in actually less than 10% of the total page views, then which means that this news, negligible, that you want to stop doing that, and then you can, so that you can free up more resources on other stories, right? And the third example here is that, since the pandemic started in January, did COVID-19 stories attract more new users compared to other stories, right? If yes, is the trend continuing or ending, right? Because there are many newsrooms, keep saying that, oh, there's a COVID-19 stories fatigue happening. People are not consuming COVID-19 related stories anymore. And if you want to use the stories to attract new users, it's not working anymore, right? But if you have this hypothesis, then you should go and look at the data and to prove or disprove your hypothesis, right? So these are some of the learnings, that I have realized in the past 5 years. So today I'm not going to go into all the technical know-how, the tools, if you are interested to know about the technical know-how, the tools, there are 2 resources here, relatively new resources. The first one is actually a series of webinars that I did with Google News Initiative in June and July. It's a 6-part webinar series. We talk about digital tools, data journalism, fact-checking, and they are available in 3 languages, English, Chinese, and Malay. And another one, it's called TB Recipes, right? It is still in beta. This is developed by TB. One of the founders, Yen, he's here, which is a data design consultancy based out of Myanmar and Singapore. So what the website have is that it provides you with, step-by-step recipes on how to create data journalism projects, right? So if you are wondering, how New York Times or Washington Post or Reuters, created those kind of, amazing data projects, you want to know what are the processes, this is where you should visit. They are trying to record down the step-by-step recipes so that you can follow, right? So I think, yep, gone more than 30 minutes. So thank you very much.
You get toilet paper.
And any questions? Yes. Toilet papers. Yeah, don't worry. You get toilet papers. Okay.
Toilet paper for all.
You can tell this is a COVID GIF. Only people who lived through the 2020 years of COVID will understand this. Can I just, I want to hear from Yan Og at TB, and maybe we'll do that after we do some questions.
Yeah, let's get some questions for Keng's session, and then I love that Yan and his team are all here, and they're going to launch this this little secret project. But yeah, let's go to questions. Who has a good question?
Can I ask the first one while we collect more questions?
You are Alan.
So Keng, you have been a judge on many of these global data awards, right? So you've gone through a lot of applications out there. What are some of the most common mistakes that newsrooms make when they're starting a data project?
So if you're really aiming to win some awards, right, for data journalism, I think the most important criteria is still, there are two things here. First is the impacts. Are you trying to uncover corruptions? What kind of impacts you are able to create with that project? I think a lot of judges are looking at that, because at the end of the day, journalism is still about changing the society, changing the system. So one thing you might think about is about the impacts, and the second thing is how, of course, this involves your technical abilities. Is how much efforts have you put into collect the data if the data is not available, or the data is trapped in a very difficult formats, for example, multiple sources in different formats, PDF, Word documents. How do you extract those data and make it open or public? I think those are the two most important criteria in a lot of these awards, right? So if you're just presenting data in a very fancy way, these are one of the biggest mistakes that I have been seeing until today. Is people think that if I have a bunch of data from a survey or released by the government, then I play some tricks on the data. I convert it into some nice fancy visualization, or I make a game using the data, or I make a quiz using the data, and that is considered as good data journalism, right? I don't think so. I don't think those kind of works can help you to win any award.
Yeah, good point. Hannah, do you want to go loud with your question?
Hello, Keng. Thank you for your presentation.
Hi, Hannah.
So I was a bit long-winded with my question, but basically it is talking about the tension that exists between editorial teams and people who read the data. So the example I used was saying that, for example, you have this presentation about cycling, and maybe your data says 100 cyclists have encountered dangerous conditions while driving, but then your editorial anecdotes are like, oh, I spoke to 5 drivers, and 5 drivers said they've never had any issues with cyclists. So sometimes the anecdotes and the data is at odds with each other, and what kind of advice have you given Newsroom to resolve this tension? Because sometimes, especially the experienced editorial team members are very, very resistant to using data, and a lot of it is like, yeah, spider sense, anecdotes. So many people, I hear this a lot on the ground and stuff like that.
Yes, there's this tension, and I don't have perfect solution for that, right? But what I'm trying to argue, to convince them is that if the limitation of our traditional reporting approach is that we believe too much in experts, in those kind of anecdotal quotes that we get, right? We go, and that's the easier way out, right? You don't have to collect any data, you don't have to do any analysis. You rely on those experts, so-called experts, right? So you talk to them, whatever they tell you, and then you just report it, as if it is true, right? And that is something that has limit how impactful our report can be, right? If you are trying to change the policies, if you're trying to convince policymakers that this doesn't work, your policy doesn't work, right? I think data or evidence is a very strong proof to do that. And I believe all journalists are aiming to change whether it's the system or policies to make a better society, right? And in that case, if you think that talking to experts, you are able to do that, then good luck, right? But I think in a more modern government or society, where there are more and more usage on data to make decisions, I think it is very important for journalists to follow the trend, to try to master data skills and use that to convince either your audience or the policymakers that data tells us that this is not working, and data tells us that these are working in other countries. So you might want to try a different approach, not just listening to several experts. We have been doing that for the past few decades, and we know the limitation and the weaknesses of the traditional approach. That I would argue that way, but of course it doesn't mean that it works for all editors. There are still editors who say that, you know, oh, we still you know, follow the experts. But even if you're still following the experts, right, you still can ask the same question from the experts. Do you have evidence? Do you have quantitative data to back up your arguments, right? If you have that, then it will be better, right? It will be more convincing for our readers.
Very good. Eva, why don't you jump in with your question?
Hi, Keng.
Tough questions, yeah.
Not a tough question, a very self-interested question. So in teaching data journalism, I have never actually tested the hypothesis of whether data journalism is actually good for business. Have you had any media outlet actually test whether, even on a small scale, whether data journalism, increasing the output of data journalism increases digital audience, increases citizens' understanding of an issue? Like, is there any evidence we can make to anybody that data journalism is actually a good investment for a newsroom?
Asking the scary questions, I see, Eva. Nice one.
A lot of hearts may be broken with this answer.
I mean, this is not the first time I got these questions. You know, when I try to push the trainings for newsrooms, I always get these questions like, can data journalism help us to bring more income, right? Grab more revenue. So some of the examples that I like to use, one is that there's a media organizations in Indonesia based in Jakarta. It's called Data. So Data is actually a very much a data-driven publications. They are trying to use their data analytical skills to monetize that skill. Not just doing that, but they're also doing data stories. So they are publishing data stories, right? But at the same time, they use that skills to earn revenue as well. So they would collaborate, for example, with government agencies to try to analyze government data and to communicate that data to the public, right? Because sometimes the governments are not doing a good job in doing that, right? And they also use their data skills to do some investigations on data, using data, and they provide that as they sell that as intelligence to, you know, communities, you know, that maybe business communities, you know, that are interested in those kind of information. But again, it's very niche, right? So it is not a nationwide general news publication. It is just basically focused on data, right? So I have worked with them on several projects, and they have a very professional data team with data engineers, data scientists, all those things, right? So that's on the very niche end, right? So on the other end, you might want to look at Malaysiakini, right? My former newsrooms, right? Actually, the guy is here. His name is Long Hui. He's within here. Okay. So I think they just started their Malaysiakini News Lab team 1 or 2 years ago, and they have published several data-driven projects. And most of their projects, right, get very high page views and also engagement from their audience. And because of that, right, they started to be able to, they actually use that interactive or data-driven approach, right, to sell it, to monetize it to their commercial clients, right? Clients who want to run advertisement campaigns, you know, things like that, but they don't want to do the traditional campaigns. They want to do like a more data-driven, right, using data to it's almost like branded content, but it's using the data journalism skills and the tools, you know, to present those kind of content. So that part is actually done by their marketing department, right? So you can see there's a transfer of skills, right, from the data team to their other departments, right? So that is another example of, you know, how do how you can further extend your data journalism skill set, you know, to help with your, you know, bottom line, right? Yeah, but if you're talking about like purely like data journalism purely and how to make money from that, I think it depends, right? Sometimes the story is really good, then you are able to sell more stories, right? If it's, you know, if the story is not, you know, that good, then it's just like normal, right? But I think there are different models being explored in different parts of the world.
I mean, I like what you're saying, Keng, about different models, or if I were to try and, you know, put it through the lens of a product designer, different products. I mean, data is just, you know, a raw ingredient. And I guess if you productize it into either reports or into sales data, or not just journalism, I guess a good product that somebody needs in the marketplace is a good product that hopefully somebody's willing to pay for. Listen, I want to go to Lila. Lila's question. Feel free to go loud. And then after Lila, let's get Jan in to talk about his very exciting TV recipes. You good for that, Jan? Awesome. Lila, jump in.
Sure. So in the interest of combating misinformation, I was wondering if you had any thoughts both on the journalist side on how to prevent sort of false conclusions, and then also on a reader side on how to promote literacy and looking at an article and saying these numbers may be powerful, but they don't make sense.
Yeah, so this is interesting because during the pandemic, right, there were a lot of discussions about ethical reporting using the COVID-19 data. There were webinars, I believe, that talk about how do you do responsible reporting, right, for the COVID-19, because we know that a lot of reports are done based on the COVID-19 data, but the data sometimes can be misleading, right, because the numbers of, for example, the numbers of confirmed cases, it also depends on how many you have tested. It also depends on how big your population is, right? Those nuances, on all those reporting, right? So it is, you can't just call it, you can't just make any adjustment using that, right? So I don't have an easy way to make sure that you are ethical, besides from, you have your own ethical standards that you have to follow. But one way of, maybe to be more transparent and accountable for your reporting is to make your data open, right? So whatever you're reporting something on using data, you should always make your data open, share it with the public, so that whoever have questions about your projects can always go back to your data and try to do the same analysis as you to see if you can reach the same conclusion, right? So that is another advantage of using data. You can't do the same for interviewing an expert, right? You can't just say that. You can also call up the expert and ask him whether he said the same thing to you, right? But for data, you can do that. You can open up the data and let them learn about data. Then about data literacy, yep, that is one issue especially in a lot of developing countries, right? So the way to do that is you need to make sure that whatever data stories that you're trying to publish, first is that when you're presenting your data, the first thing is that you need to understand your audience, right? Don't publish something that they don't understand, right? So I always tell journalists that you have to test your chart, you test your website, you test your quiz or whatever that you're trying to make with your audience first before you publish it. So usability tests, right? That's one thing. And I think more and more data teams are publishing explainers, right? To explain about, say, statistics about survey, public polls, right? Those kind of things. What is margin of error? Is this public polls more believable than another public poll, right? To try to educate the audience, right? So it's a two-way thing, right? One way, you need to make sure that whatever you publish can be understood easily by your target audience. On the other way, you should use data and your presentation skill to try to explain and try to raise the data literacy among your audience. Yep.
Thank you, Keng. That was very cool, very nicely summarized. Jan, I have a great way for you to jump in with what you're doing with TV recipes. Yelling has a question that kind of is a great segue for you to jump in on. Yelling is saying, how do I encourage my small newsroom to be data-driven? If we don't have the know-how or the resources, do you have any recommendations for visual tools to use? All yours, buddy.
Did you plot the question?
He did not set this question up.
He did not set this up. Yelling, we'll send you your check later.
That's right.
Thank you, Yelling, and thank you, Ellen and Rashad, for kind of letting the PB team do a little pitch. And thank you, Kang, for mentioning us as well. So, Yelling, totally right. We've been working with journalists in newsrooms in Southeast Asia and elsewhere on teaching them data literacy skills. And of course, especially in our part of the world, they don't have time, they don't have the resources, the editors don't understand what's going on, the readers don't have much data literacy to understand, a lot of complicated data as well. And so it's a real challenge, but so we've been thinking of ways of how we can kind of make this into something that's accessible, and make it so that the learning curve is not just this cliff, but something that you can go gradually, little by little. And we've been brainstorming this for a long time, and our latest attempt at answering that question is this project that we call TV Recipes. And I'm sure you guys, you all listen to podcasts, so you've heard about Blue Apron ad nauseum, where they give you, they'll teach you how to cook these gourmet meals by giving you all these ingredients already prepared in a step-by-step list of instructions, and then you just follow them, and you can kind of follow these little steps to create a very good, very nicely made and very good tasting gourmet dish, right? So we kind of come up with that idea of doing Blue Apron, but for data journalism. So what we do is we are always working with newsrooms in the region, and we're publishing data journalism pieces with data visualizations and data analysis and so on and so forth. So we thought we'll take these visualizations and analyses that we've already published, and then break down all these things step by step, give the people who are learning these things all the original data and all the little tiny steps along the way, right? Because there's a lot of learning materials online, but a lot of the ways these learning materials are written is they shorten everything. I'm sure you've seen that famous meme of drawing the owl. So you draw 2 circles, step 1, and then step 2, draw the rest of the owl. And it's where do you get from A to B, right? So we're planning to kind of put a twist into that by saying we start with something that's already published, that's professionally done, and then we break it down step by step so anybody can follow it. Yeah, so you guys can go check it out right now at bb.recipes. We starting off with a recipe based on an article we worked with Frontier Myanmar, who are really good journalists and friends, about Chinese investment, and we're gonna be publishing that recipe in 3 parts. So you're gonna be able to make a map. If I can share my screen for 2 seconds. Is that cool, guys?
Go for it.
Yep, hit it.
Thank you. So this is the original article that came out last year. And inside it, there is this map that shows how hydropower projects that are mostly funded by China are going to be exploding in Myanmar in the coming decades. So we're taking this little bit here, and we're breaking that down into multiple parts. And the first part is already published here, but it's already, it's quite crude right now, and we want to start prototyping and improving on this. And so we need beta testers. We need people who want to try it out and see if it's difficult or easy. Give us advice on what other newsrooms we can reach out to collaborate with, and so on and so forth. So we were putting a lot of effort into writing this. This is just part 1, and it's already really long. But I guarantee you this doesn't jump any of the steps. So yeah. Thanks, guys.
Very, very good. Excellent.
So good, people, jump in. Be beta testers for TV Recipes. I'm very excited by this. Yeah, we want to help you with the prototyping, Jan. We're going to be following this closer than you might like. We're really kicked. Thank you for jumping in here. Listen, I'm gonna have to wrap. The producer, my co-founder, and everybody in this room, filled with 3 people, are telling me to get this moving along. Listen, thank you all for coming. I just want to quickly again remind you that tomorrow we have Haikal Fahim of Telem, in fact, the data company, to come in at 4 o'clock and talk us through media careers in the time of COVID and how it's affected that entire industry. 5 o'clock right after that is BYOB, otherwise known as Bring Your Online Beverage, with our friends from IMS, Henrik and Megain. They're talking about a new project they've got going on with MediaBridge. And at 9 p.m. Singapore time, we have an exciting session with the legendary membership puzzle project. Ariel Zirulnik and Jessica Best are going to be talking us through that. We're really excited by that session. It's partly brought to us by our friends at MDIF. Pat Bird is here. And it's about how it's actually really exciting because it's about staffing. How do you staff a membership newsroom? What is memberful behavior? The skills that are needed, the job descriptions that are involved, and the roles that play out. Very exciting. 9 p.m. tomorrow. So come have a drink with us.
Also, just very quickly, I want to add to that. So Membership Puzzle Project yesterday released their study across, I think they took about 6 months to put this together. It's chock full of case studies about memberships around the world in newsrooms. So if you are thinking about trying a membership program in your newsroom, make sure you download that. Actually, you don't even have to download. It's not a PDF. It's a website. Go to the website, have a look at it. All the knowledge is right there for you.
Yeah, this is going to be a big one, folks. Yeah, looking forward to tomorrow. It's a big day. It's Splice Beta tomorrow. We love all of you hanging out here with us. Please come back. We love your energy. Come and hang out with us. Pat Bird has just dropped the link in. Fantastic.
Wonderful. I was just going to reach my keyboard here.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everybody.